No, it's got to make it into the final cut of the video now. Can't edit it out.
This is the One Accord Podcast, and we're back again with another conversation in our biblical theology project where we're going from the beginning of Genesis to the end of Revelation, talking about every chapter in between, seeing if looking at all the details will help us as Christians to find even more unity as we talk about really everything along the way. And while we can't talk about every single detail, as we look at every chapter, at least the big things can come out. And so here to talk with me again are Greg and Eric. And Greg, I think last time we asked Eric how he was doing first, and he stole your adjective. So why don't we ask you how you're doing? So if anything, you'll just throw a stumbling block in front of Eric before we get started.
That's my goal. So yeah, hopefully I'm doing fantastic or excellent or wonderful or fine. Whatever Eric is, yeah, nailed it. I'm doing very well. Yeah, we're recording this right before Christmas, and so enjoying the season. So yeah.
Well, we'll have to keep our eyes peeled about how the Lord feels about someone who intentionally throws stumbling blocks in the way of a brother. So, I'm here for his sanctification. So. Oh. And we all rejoice. Eric, how about you? How are you doing today?
Well, I'm doing great, knowing how much spiritual progress I've made from all the stumbling blocks Greg has thrown my way. So, I'm holy as a result. No, I'm doing good. These are some really, in my mind, some exciting chapters to cover. And when I was a kid, these chapters were really, I wanted to read these, and I wanted, even when I was little, my grandma read these to me. So I'm psyched about it. I'm really excited to jump into these.
Well, we're talking about Genesis 36, 37, and 38, and I'm learning this as we're talking right now. What was it about these chapters in particular?
What about Genesis chapter 36 really kind of got you all fired up?
Well, I'm more so talking about just in general the patriarchs. Okay. Reading about Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and especially when you get into Joseph, that was the icing on the cake for me. So I'm mostly talking about the Joseph story.
Did you mostly have Donny Osmond in your mind when you were hearing these things, or?
Yeah.
Maybe there's a cultural reference that I don't understand.
You don't know Donny Osmond was Joseph in The Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. You don't know that?
I saw the play once. I never saw the movie. So.
You're wasting too much time reading Tolkien, and you're missing out on these other.
Brother.
Excuse me, Joe.
Brother, listen.
Did you say waste?
Listen,
I did.
I know we said we were here for talking biblical theology, but we need an intervention. So
you crossed the line with that.
You really have. You really have.
And with that note, why don't we go ahead and transition hard fade into talking about the text. So Genesis up first today, Genesis 36. Why don't we read the text before we talk about the text?
Now these are the records of the generations of Esau, that is, Edom. Esau took his wives from the daughters of Canaan, Adah the daughter of Elon the Hittite, and Oholibamah the daughter of Anah, and the granddaughter of Zibeon the Hivite. Also Basemath, Ishmael's daughter, the sister of Nebaioth. Adah bore Eliphaz to Esau, and Basemath bore Reuel, and Oholibamah bore Jush and Jalam and Korah. These are the sons of Esau who were born to him in the land of Canaan. Then Esau took his wives and his sons and his daughters and all his household, and his livestock, and all his cattle and all his goods which he had acquired in the land of Canaan, and went to another land away from his brother Jacob. For their property had become too great for them to live together, and the land where they sojourned could not sustain them because of their livestock. So Esau lived in the hill country of Seir. Esau is Edom. These then are the records of the generations of Esau, the father of the Edomites, in the hill country of Seir. These are the names of Esau's sons: Eliphaz the son of Esau's wife Adah, Reuel the son of Esau's wife Basemath. The sons of Eliphaz were Taman, Omar, Zepho, and Gatam, and Kenaz. Timnah was a concubine of Esau's son Eliphaz, and she bore Amalek to Eliphaz. These are the sons of Esau's wife Adah. These are the sons of Reuel, Nahath and Zerah, Shammah and Mizah. These were the sons of Esau's wife Basemath. These were the sons of Esau's wife Oholibamah, the daughter of Anah and the granddaughter of Zibeon. She bore to Esau Jush and Jalam and Korah. These are the chiefs of the sons of Esau. The sons of Eliphaz, the firstborn of Esau, are Chief Teman, Chief Omar, Chief Zepho, Chief Kanaz, Chief Korah, Chief Gatam, Chief Amalek. These are the chiefs descended from Eliphaz in the land of Edom. These are the sons of Ada. These are the sons of Reuel, Esau's son, Chief Nahath, Chief Zerah, Chief Shammah, Chief Mizah. These are the chiefs descended from Reuel in the land of Edom. These are the sons of Esau's wife Basemath. These are the sons of Esau's wife Oholibamah, Chief Jush, Chief Jalam, Chief Korah. These are the chiefs descended from Esau's wife Oholibamah, the daughter of Anah. These are the sons of Esau, that is, Edom, and these are their chiefs. These are the sons of Seir the Horit, the inhabitants of the land. Lotan and Shobal and Zibeon and Anah and Dishon and Ezer and Dishon. These are the chiefs descended from the Horites, the sons of Seir in the land of Edom. The sons of Lotan were Hori and Hemam, and Lotan's sister was Timnah. These are the sons of Shobal, Alvan and Manahath and Ebal, Shepo and Onam. These are the sons of Zibeon, Aya and Anah. He is the Anah who found the hot springs in the wilderness when he was pasturing the donkeys of his father Zibeon. These are the children of Anah, Dishon and Oholibamah, the daughter of Anah. These are the sons of Dishon, Hemdan and Eshban and Ithran and Sharan. These are the sons of Ezer, Bilhan and Zavan and Akan. These are the sons of Dishan, Uz and Aran. These are the chiefs descended from the Horites: Chief Lotan, Chief Shobal, Chief Zibeon, Chief Anah, Chief Dishon, Chief Ezer, Chief Dishan. These are the chiefs descended from the Horites, according to their various chiefs in the land of Seir. Now these are the kings who reigned in the land of Edom before any king reigned over the sons of Israel. Bela, the son of Beor, reigned in Edom, and the name of his city was Dinhaba. Then Bela died, and Jobab, the son of Zerah of Bozrah, became king in his place. Then Jobab died, and Husham of the land of the Temanites became king in his place. Then Husham died, and Hadad the son of Bedad, who defeated Midian in the field of Moab, became king in his place, and the name of his city was Avith. Then Hadad died, and Samlah of Masrekah became king in his place. Then Samlah died, and Shaul of Rehoboth on the Euphrates River became king in his place. Then Shaul died, and Baal-Hanan the son of Achbor became king in his place. Then Baal-Hanan the son of Achbor died, and Hadar became king in his place. And the name of his city was Pau, and his wife's name was Mehetabel, the daughter of Matred, daughter of Mezahab. Now these are the names of the chiefs descended from Esau according to their families and their localities by their names: Chief Timnah, Chief Alva, Chief Jetheth, Chief Oholibamah, Chief Elah, Chief Pinon, Chief Kanas, Chief Taman, Chief Mibzar, Chief Magdiel, Chief Iram. These are the chiefs of Edom, that is Esau, the father of the Edomites, according to their habitations in the land of their possession.
All right, brothers. Well, in Genesis 36, we're going to see some more continuing narrative. Previously, we had talked about the blessing that was bestowed upon Jacob and Esau, and there was some conversation. I think that you guys, if I recall correctly, spent especially a little bit of time discussing, is this the blessing for individuals? Is this the blessing for the nations? Is it kind of some combination of the two? When will we really see the fulfillment of this? So now as we see this movement of Esau, are we beginning to see some fulfillment of this in the individual's lifetime? Greg, why don't we go ahead and start with you on this one?
Yeah, that's the way I see it. As the land couldn't support Esau, a land that's very desirable, right? Like we make a big deal of this land, and maybe we should, maybe we shouldn't in some ways. But without a doubt, in my view, Esau having to leave and going into this mountainous region away from the land promised is, in my view, again, definitely a fulfillment of, or the beginning of the fulfillment of that. So while I don't want to strip anything away from either the future fulfillment, I also don't want to take away from at least the beginning of that individual fulfillment as, as Isaac blessed his sons.
Would it be fair to say that, in your view, we're seeing the fulfillment of this beginning in the lifetime of the individuals who were blessed, and then it will continue into the generation? So there's no gap between, okay, the individual who was told this prophetically that might be fulfilled be fulfilled 200 years, 300 years later. It began with the individual and then continued on into the nation. Is that your view?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, I appreciate that. Eric, what do you think? I mean, I know that you kind of. And rightfully so, the prophecy was 2 nations are in your womb, and then we saw the continuation of that. Do you agree with how Greg's stating that, or would you still view it maybe slightly differently?
No, I do agree with what Greg said. And I don't know how it could be denied, because clearly in Genesis 27, when Isaac is giving these blessings / prophecies, he contrasts the kind of, the lands that his sons would live in, and his sons and their descendants. And so in Genesis 27:39, he describes the land that Esau and his descendants would move into, and that's, the land of Seir, if I'm pronouncing that right. And so, yeah, I think that Esau moving into that land initially was like setting things in motion for all of his descendants to end up living there. So you can't really have one without the other. You have to have both. So I think Greg's right about that.
And so I think we're all in agreement, and I agree with you. I think it would be really hard to read this and be so obstinate as to say, no, the blessing is only for the individual and stopped with the individual and it doesn't continue on to the nation, or to say, no, it somehow applies vaguely to the nation and skipped over the individual. Like, both of those seem to be untenable situations. But I think that you guys were preparing for future conversations down the road where we'll read about maybe these nations being even titled by the name of the individual who they originated from. And then the question really becomes, especially for some of the theological systems, which we encountered in our systematic conversations before, of, are the nations in picture, are the individuals in picture? And sometimes it seems that we just might pick whichever one is most convenient for whatever systematic conclusion we're trying to draw. And I think you would both agree, well, we shouldn't just pick whichever one's convenient. We do need to pay very careful attention and realize that, just like with Israel, we saw his name be changed recently. When we say Israel, sometimes we're talking about Jacob, the individual, and other times we will be talking about his descendants, which came after him and formed a nation. And maybe sometimes it's all of them. Sometimes maybe just the individual or just the nation are in view, and we have to be careful to try and unwind that ball of knots carefully, and the way that the text intends, rather than just simply what is most convenient for our system. I think you guys would agree with that, at least on its face. Yeah,
and as much as I right now want to go and fight that battle, we're not there yet, and so I won't. But yes, what I want to do is very carefully discern where we're talking about individuals, where we're talking about nations. Is there reason to say we're only talking about individuals or only talking about nations, or in the context that's happening, should we understand both, the both and, as opposed to the either or? And so I was hoping to set us up very carefully for that.
I think you've done an admirable job of that, and it's nice to know that it doesn't seem that there's a ton of objection currently. We'll see if it resolves any of if we've got some fair fighting terms, when we get later, to see if it helps clarify or not. But Eric, you have anything else that you would add? Or, I feel like the initial conversation seemed like there was a little bit more agreement, but as we talked a little bit more, it seemed like we got closer. Now it seems like we agree, at least right now, about as much as we could. Maybe I'm misunderstanding it, but do you have anything else to add, or am I misrepresenting
the disagreement? I actually think the disagreement could have been my fault. Yes, it is.
We're all happy to.
It absolutely was.
You were wrong, Greg. We appreciate. We accept your apology.
I will fall on that sword. Probably because I understand and agree that the reality of this fulfillment truly is put on display most prominently in the nations, and so maybe we should lean on that as the primary focus. But as I read that text back in Genesis 27, that was talking to and about an individual. And so I wanted to make sure to stress that, because where we put the stresses later on are really going to have a lot of, it really impacts the camps that we fall into today. And so while I don't disagree at all that the true fulfillment is seen later on, I be very obstinate about putting the stresses in that text where that belongs.
Yeah, it would be really unnatural to assume that when the man Esau went into the land of Seir, that had nothing to do with what Isaac had said in Genesis 27. That would be absurd to make that claim. I think it's just, I look at like the maybe the broader picture. And it depends on the details. Like, when he says the older will serve the younger. Well, I think that almost certainly was fulfilled through the nations rather than the individuals.
And what does it mean to serve? Like in what context? Again,
well, we'll get there. I'll give you a very specific example.
I mean, again, I'm in 2 Samuel right now, and so like I get there's a true tangible fulfillment of that. But I guess I'm not exactly certain that I want to rule out all the ways in which truly, literally, in the life of those two men, one was superior over, one was inferior to the other.
Well, I want to point that this is not totally related, but I feel like as I read this, I completely missed this the first 100 times I read it. But I want to there's just one little detail that I just thought was kind of heartwarming, if you will. And that's in Genesis 36, and it is verses 6 and 7. Then Esau took his wives and his sons and his daughters and all his household and his livestock and all his cattle and all his goods, which he had acquired in the land of Canaan, and went to another land away from his brother Jacob. Now, verse 7 gives the reason. For their property had become too great for them to live together, and the land where they sojourned could not sustain them because of their livestock. Now, there's one little phrase in verse 7. Their property had become too great for them to live together. Now, maybe I'm reading too much into this, but the implication seems to be that it's almost like they were okay with living together, but they realized this was not going to be possible because their property was just too great. And so Esau, and this might somewhat support what you just said, Greg, possibly kind of like he did what Abraham did, maybe. Like, okay, well, you pick the land, you can have this land or whatever, and I will move away. I'll move to another part.
And that's actually a more humble position than what I'm arguing for. I'm with you 3/4 of the way. No. I'm with you 3/4 of the way. But when it came time to who gets to stay and who needs to beat feet, there wasn't I'll go. It's no. This belongs to Jacob. So Esau, you got to go somewhere else, man. You don't have to go home, but you can't stay here, kind of thing. So it wasn't him out of humility trying to be this conciliatory figure. It was no. This belongs to Jacob, so you got to go.
Well, that could be that, and I think they probably by that time, they were more in agreement about that.
And again, I'm not saying there was a hostility about it. It was just like, but that should have been Esau's, right? Like that right to stay, that right of inheritance of that land should have belonged to Esau had things played out in their normal, natural way.
Oh, yeah.
And so this is exactly what I'm talking about when I say we see this at least beginning to be fulfilled. Why didn't Esau get to stay? Because it wasn't Esau's, but it should have been, all things naturally considered.
Yeah.
Well, I think that all leads very well into our next point, and I appreciate you reading again part of this chapter. We see the text drawing attention again to where Esau's wives come from. But why do you think that we're getting this detail emphasized for us again?
Well, the Canaanites were a wicked and cursed people. That goes back to Genesis 9:25. And for this reason, Abraham didn't want Isaac to marry a Canaanite, and Isaac told Jacob not to marry one. So here, it seems like the author may have mentioned Esau's Canaanite wives, not simply for the sake of historical accuracy, but to reveal the root cause of the moral corruption of future generations. Because, and I don't want to give too much away, but I mean, we kind of already know
We're
a little bit
acknowledging
about
certain
this.
things.
Yeah. I mean, some things are the things we've already read kind of shed some light on this, but the nation of Edom, which are the descendants of Esau, they were a very depraved people, and it might be that the author's saying that the root cause of this corruption, this depravity, is this Canaanite influence that was brought in by Esau marrying these Canaanite women who worshipped vile gods, and these practices were brought in. And so I think my assumption is, and maybe there's more to the story, but it seems like that could very well be one of the reasons why they're brought up.
Sure, I can definitely see this as a worldview explaining thing for the original audience. As the people, when this was written, as the people are coming out of 400 years in Egypt, and they need to understand their history, and they need to understand these relationships and obligations with people around them. Yet, why are there fractures between them? This helps to color in real life circumstances for the original audience, as far as I can tell.
Well, that leads to maybe a little bit of a follow-up question, and perhaps there isn't any more to add, so that's fair. I'm not necessarily trying to get you to overextend your position if you've said it all already. But explaining the context, explaining the kind of the future moral corruption which we would expect to see, is that the intention of this, or is there anything else that we can take away from this chapter which details many of Esau's descendants?
Well, I think this record is important because it explains the origins of what later became a prominent nation in the ancient world, the nation of Edom. And according to Isaac's prophecy in Genesis 27:40, the descendants of Esau, they would have I'll call it a unique relationship with the descendants of Jacob in the future. So we see these both the nation that would come from Jacob and the nation that came from Esau. These were very prominent nations, of course, Jacob's being the most. And so it gives you a record of like where these people came from. And so then when you read later on in the story and you read about the interactions between the Edomites and the Israelites, you know everything that led up to these conflicts and events. So that it makes perfect sense to me why they included it here.
Yeah, no, for sure. When I hear questions like that, or when I write questions like that, because I wrote this question, I think about, like, if I were preaching chapter 36 of Genesis, what would be my application? Like what would I tell you? Now, body of Christ, take away this and apply this. It becomes hard. Like, don't be an Esau. Don't take a Canaanite wife. But what I think really more might be the takeaway, first of all, is the faithfulness of God still dealing well with Esau in spite of these things. He didn't strike Esau dead when he decided to take a Canaanite wife. The God's providence there. I would want to draw this more towards God-centeredness and His grace and kindness and mercy in spite of Esau's not doing it well.
Well, you're really talking my language there with trying to be more God-centered rather than man-centered on your applications. That's easier said than done, but sure. It's a good pursuit. So I appreciate that. You guys got anything else on chapter 36? I know that Eric is champing at the bit to get into chapter 37 and talk about.
Why are you always champing?
He's the champion. He's trying to.
See what he did there?
I do. Yeah, nice. Very punny. But I know we want to talk about Joseph and his dream, an exciting chapter. But you guys got anything else on 36 before we dive into the next chapter?
No.
Nope.
All right. Well, let's go ahead and read it, and then we'll talk about it.
Now Jacob lived in the land where his father had sojourned, in the land of Canaan. These are the records of the generations of Jacob. Joseph, when 17 years of age, was pasturing the flock with his brothers while he was still a youth, along with the sons of Bilhah and the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives. And Joseph brought back a bad report about them to their father. Now Israel loved Joseph more than all his sons, because he was the son of his old age, and he made him a varicolored tunic. His brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, and so they hated him and could not speak to him on friendly terms. Then Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him even more. He said to them, "Please listen to this dream which I have had. For behold, we were binding sheaves in the field, and lo, my sheaf rose up and also stood erect. And behold, your sheaves gathered around and bowed down to my sheaf." Then his brothers said to him, "Are you actually going to reign over us, or are you really going to rule over us?" So they hated him even more for his dreams and for his words. Now he had still another dream, and related it to his brothers, and said, "Lo, I have had still another dream, and behold, the sun and the moon and 11 stars were bowing down to me." He related it to his father and to his brothers, and his father rebuked him and said to him, "What is this dream that you have had? Shall I and your mother and your brothers actually come to bow ourselves down before you to the ground?" His brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the saying in mind. Then his brothers went to pasture their father's flock in Shechem. Israel said to Joseph, "Are not your brothers pasturing the flock in Shechem? Come, and I will send you to them." And he said to him, "I will go." Then he said to him, "Go now and see about the welfare of your brothers and the welfare of the flock, and bring word back to me." So he sent him from the valley of Hebron, and he came to Shechem. A man found him, and behold, he was wandering in the field. And the man asked him, "What are you looking for?" He said, "I am looking for my brothers. Please tell me where they are pasturing the flock." Then the man said, "They have moved from here, for I heard them say, 'Let us go to Dothan.'" So Joseph went after his brothers and found them at Dothan. When they saw him from a distance, and before he came close to them, they plotted against him to put him to death. They said to one another, "Here comes this dreamer. Now then, come and let us kill him and throw him into one of the pits, and we will say, 'A wild beast devoured him.' Then let us see what will become of his dreams." But Reuben heard this and rescued him out of their hands and said, "Let us not take his life." Reuben further said to them, "Shed no blood. Throw him into this pit that is in the wilderness, but do not lay hands on him, that he might rescue him out of their hands, to restore him to his father." So it came about when Joseph reached his brothers that they stripped Joseph of his tunic, the varicolored tunic that was on him, and they took him and threw him into the pit. Now the pit was empty, without any water in it. Then they sat down to eat a meal. And as they raised their eyes and looked, behold, a caravan of Ishmaelites was coming from Gilead, with their camels bearing aromatic gum and balm and myrrh, on their way to bring them down to Egypt. Judah said to his brothers, "What profit is it for us to kill our brother and cover up his blood? Come and let us sell him to the Ishmaelites and not lay our hands on him, for he is our brother, our own flesh." And his brothers listened to him. Then some Midianite traders passed by, so they pulled him up and lifted Joseph out of the pit and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 shekels of silver. Thus they brought Joseph into Egypt. Now Reuben returned to the pit, and behold, Joseph was not in the pit, so he tore his garments. He returned to his brothers and said, "The boy is not there. As for me, where am I to go?" So they took Joseph's tunic and slaughtered a male goat and dipped the tunic in the blood. And they sent the varicolored tunic and brought it to their father and said, "We found this. Please examine it to see whether it is your son's tunic or not." Then he examined it and said, "It is my son's tunic. A wild beast has devoured him. Joseph has surely been torn to pieces." So Jacob tore his clothes and put sackcloth on his loins and mourned for his son many days. Then all his sons and all his daughters arose to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted. And he said, "Surely I will go down to Sheol in mourning for my son." So his father wept for him. Meanwhile the Midianites sold him in Egypt to Potiphar, Pharaoh's officer, the captain of the bodyguard.
Well, Brothers, chapter 37, it is a fairly well-known chapter. Maybe there are a few chapters in Genesis that aren't as well-known, but as we're getting the origins of various nations, some of that stuff isn't as exciting. But this one, because of even pop culture references that maybe Greg doesn't get, but most people recognize, this Donny Osmond film and others. It's just as iconic as Charlton Heston as Moses.
Is it really?
I think so. But anyway. Maybe Donnie's watching our show and he'll be like, I can't believe someone didn't see my movie. It's Greg.
There's one person in the world that didn't see it.
Right. It spawned all these plays and everything else. But in any event, Greg, you've already mentioned, you kind of pulled back the curtain a little bit. You wrote these questions. The question that you were kind of counting up, we've seen several dreams and things before. Often the text itself will interpret these dreams for us. But if it didn't, how would we deal with some of these things? It's kind of an open-ended thing, but what do we make of visions and dreams? We'll turn it over to you as we're talking about chapter 37.
Yeah, I find, again, because my mind is way, way ahead from where we are right now, I want to set the stage.
Can I say, knock it off? Try and be present with us, Greg. Come on, man.
I'm afraid you're a bit boring, Joe. So
I've heard that before.
Have you really? No, totally not true. As I counted it up, we've had just a couple so far occurrences of dreams, maybe what you'd call visions. We'll have to decide how we deal, if we deal with dreams and visions as separate categories, or if they fall in the same bucket. But we're going to get to places where what we do with dreams and visions becomes very, very important. So I want to just start highlighting and paying attention right now so that we treat them the same or that we treat them fairly later on. And so here's an instance where Joseph has a couple of dreams. And fortunately for us, we get the interpretation right away. Now, if we hadn't got the interpretation right away and we had just been, we just had the dream reported to us, I would go, I have no idea what, I don't know that I would intuitively leap to what this is. But what I think would happen if we didn't have those is we'd have books and books written about different views on what to do with these sheaves and what the sheaves mean, or what the star is, or what the moon is, or what all these stars are.
I'm pretty sure even with the interpretation of the text, we still have books and books saying
there probably are, right? Which just, again, I think if the book of Revelation had been included in the Old Testament, we would argue about it way less than we do. But here is one of those data points to start helping us build a lens through which to look at dreams and visions. I think it's important.
Well, you stated something very important, and at the risk of getting
awesome.
It's not the first time, won't be the last. But I told you to kind of stay with us here. But your point about Revelation, as you bring that up, one of the reasons why people can't understand Revelation, I'm not saying it's the only reason, but one of the major reasons is that people aren't very familiar with the Old Testament. And this is a vision that specifically, we see this same imagery again in the book of Revelation. And here in Genesis, the original source material, it tells us what this means. And so if we don't pay attention to Genesis, and we don't know the source material, and we don't pay attention to where the interpretation is actually given, then when we get to Revelation, because the interpretation isn't given again, people just begin to wildly speculate and run all over the place and write books and teach seminars and have whatever other nonsense is going on. And it sounds real good, especially to people that have no idea. Well, it can. It can be exciting because it's not tied to the original source material. So the closer attention that we pay to the Old Testament, we don't need Revelation to be in the Old Testament, but the number of allusions to passages specifically in the Old Testament is huge. And John intended for his readers to understand the visions. Again, I've said this so many times, but Revelation means an uncovering. It's not an obscuring. And so people are so afraid of it. It's meant to be understood. And the better we understand the Old Testament, the better we'll understand Revelation. Now, that won't clear up all the problems, but just like in any apocalyptic or visionary or dream type thing, usually when it is unclear, the Bible, if we'll just keep reading it, eventually it will just tell us what this means so we don't have to speculate. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that if you have a dream that you can look at the scripture and know exactly what that means. And we might see other places that talk about that. That's a very interesting question as well that kind of goes beyond this text a little bit. And I don't know. I don't know what to do when somebody else says, I had this dream. What does this mean? I just heard a joke. I was doing a lot of driving last week. I was listening to a sermon, and there was the pastor had a joke in his sermon. As you mentioned, we're filming this right before Christmas time, and it was he said he heard about a woman who, as Christmas was approaching, said to her husband, honey, I just had a dream that on Christmas morning I woke up and I opened up a beautiful diamond necklace. What do you think that means? And he said, oh, I see what you're doing. I'm picking up what you're laying down. And so then on Christmas morning, she saw the little box and she opened it up, and behold, it was a book on interpreting prophetic dreams. That was a little good chuckle. You guys chuckled more than I did when I was listening to it. But anyway, it was not too bad. But Eric, what do you think about if Greg's question is an interesting one, it causes for a little holy speculation. If we didn't get the interpretation, what would we do with this? That's one thing. My answer is, well, I'm just glad we do get the interpretation, because then I don't have to speculate. But what do you have to say about Greg's question?
It's a good question. And to be honest, I don't see how anyone could have interpreted Joseph's dreams literally. If they took his first dream literally about their sheaves coming to life, this sounds like an episode of VeggieTales. You got Bob the tomato, Larry the cucumber, and Joseph the bundle of grain. Taking his first dream literally just seems nonsensical. If they took the second dream literally, they'd have to believe that the sun, moon, and stars were like living beings submitting to his authority, like he's some sort of god or something.
And it can't be taken dead literally, can it? Because one of these heavenly bodies that bow down to him is interpreted as his mother, and his mother was long dead by the time anyone was bowing down to him, right?
Yep. Yeah, and there's an explanation for that later that we can get into that when we arrive there. But I just think that it's like when they heard his dreams, they immediately, without even, the impression you get from reading the text is it was like they didn't even hesitate. They knew exactly what the dreams meant. And it could be because, when a dream gives like a very specific number, like sometimes, the word, like the number 1,000 is not always meant to be a specific amount in Scripture.
Or so you and I might hold.
Yeah, well, and there's other things too, like not even just 1,000, but like, you could have like, sometimes there's a rounding going on or whatever. But, when you have like a specific number, Joseph has this dream and there's this specific number of things that are bowing to him. That number corresponds to something in the real world. And it was like they just immediately knew what it was. They didn't have to think about it. So I think it was more so like the details of the dream, not so much the literalness of it, is what they were focused on. At least that's what it seems like to me.
The idea that came across in the dream, not necessarily all the little details in the dream.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. That's the way I see it.
That's the way I see it as well.
Well,
be a dissenter.
No, that's all right. I am thankful that the interpretation is there, and it's good to, some of the other issues that I'm going to maybe just not take the bait on about numbers. We can share our opinions about, what these numbers mean, and I think that as we approach each one, we should take them on a case-by-case basis. At least here, as we're looking at this number, you're right, sun, moon, and 11 stars. That seems to be pretty specific to their family. It seems to be well understood by everyone. There's no reason to indicate here or elsewhere that the interpretation of the dream is wrong. It is interesting that Joseph seems to be relating it in a way that he's excited to tell them, and they do not seem excited to receive it. They wonder what in the world is going on with him. And, Joseph is one of these characters or figures. I don't like to say character because that makes it sound like they're made up, but a figure, this historical figure who we get a lot of information about him, and he is very commendable. He's a very righteous person. But I've heard pastors and teachers talk about this chapter in particular because of the way that he's telling that he was a braggart, almost saying that he kind of deserved even what came to him, that he had a I don't know, he was lacking in humility or that he was trying to rub this in their face. That's not how I read it, but do you guys think that Joseph, at least maybe in his young age here, was being just a braggart and kind of throwing it in their face? Or I tend to view it more as he received this word from the Lord and he was sharing with his family. His family took it poorly, but I don't think that this reflects badly on Joseph. I think it reflects badly on those in the response of others. But what do you guys think?
I hear critiques like that, and I think, what do critics do besides criticize? If he hadn't told this, we wouldn't have the record, and then we go, we always have the ability to find fault here. So is Joseph being a braggart? I don't see the text painting that picture. Was there a more wise and mature way to share this? I don't know. Like, I don't think the text even is trying to point that out. If you want to read that in, I think that's on you. But maybe I'm reading in a little bit more generosity, but it seems like what's happening here is God revealing something, and we are seeing the negative reaction to that. I don't read any ability to judge the quality with which Joseph is operating here.
Yeah, the only thing I would say is that based on the moral character of Joseph's brothers, and we can't know about every one of them necessarily. But they were all in agreement. At least Reuben wasn't, but they were all in agreement that that they needed to, or at least it was a good idea to do a little brotherly gag and sell him into slavery.
It's going to be hilarious
with brothers like that.
Oh man, what a prankster those guys were. But anyway. So, did Joseph stand out among his brothers? Was his character just totally different? I don't know. It's difficult to say. I don't think you can really, from this text alone, I don't think you can really make a strong case one way or the other.
The record that, and again, I know that I'm jumping ahead now. The record that we get of Joseph, the Bible paints him. No, it's not. I'm not talking about every moment of his whole life, but he seems to be painted in a very positive light. We see nothing glaringly negative about Joseph, which is an interesting characteristic, considering the liberty with which we've seen other patriarchs and people on God's side, the willingness of the Bible to point out their flaws. Even when, why did we have to see that flaw? Well, you just did.
I have a hard time reading this as anything other than Joseph just being excited about what God has shown him. And I don't think that he anticipated this reaction. I mean, my goodness, if he did, I can't imagine that he would have told him. And it does take a turn on him. I mean, Joseph's path is seemingly very difficult after this, even just from what we read about what they do to him right here. And so, Eric, you already mentioned Reuben. Let's go ahead and talk about that. I mean, Reuben does stand out as trying to at least say, hey, maybe let's not kill him.
Yeah, Reuben, definitely not the hero, at least not the way I read it. Sure. Did he try to hold his brother's hands back from murder? Yes. So yay that. But goodness, again, with brothers like these, prefer to be an only child. Thanks.
Yeah, no doubt.
Yeah. Well, I'm just trying to think of what, was going on in Reuben's mind as all this was happening. It seems like once Reuben realized what happened to Joseph, he felt responsible because he was the oldest. And maybe the shame associated with allowing his brothers to sell Joseph into slavery was just simply too much for him to bear. So he went along with the lie that Joseph was torn by wild animals. And maybe he thought that, telling the truth would turn all his brothers against him too. That's possible.
That's so interesting, right? Because, okay, so here's Reuben. He hears his brothers wanting to kill Joseph. And his thought was, I'm going to convince them to toss him into a pit so that when my brothers go away, I'm going to go pull my brother out of the pit. And then Joseph's going to be restored and everything's going to be fine. There's going to be conflict somewhere with someone, regardless of what you do here, Reuben. So it's odd to me that he was willing to to go at least halfway. And then when his brother gets sold into slavery, he goes, yeah, you know what? In for a pinch, in for a pound, I might as well go along with this, got torn apart. Why didn't he just walk back home and go, hey, Dad, listen, my idiot brothers, you know what they did? They sold Joseph into slavery. Now let's go back. Let's go get him and bring him back. Would my brothers be angry? Guess what? They were going to be angry with you either way. It's not like Joseph was going to come back and wasn't going to say, hey, Dad, all these knuckleheads, they tossed me into a pit. Reuben, let me out. Just kind of one of those situations where if you just stop for a moment, take yourself out of it, think, apply a little bit of wisdom, you probably could have resolved a whole, but of course, again, this was God, they meant it for evil, God meant it for good. So
I think too, and you got to remember, just sometime before this, Reuben's two brothers killed an entire city of people. So it's not really shocking that they would consider killing their annoying brother that keeps telling on them. So
you're looking at Simeon and Levi. You're like,
I know you.
You guys,
you got the side eye going. Where you're like, well, maybe we don't kill him. Maybe we don't. Okay, let's maybe. All right, guys. I don't know what you're thinking. Yeah, those guys might have been loose cannons for sure.
Yeah, but there's a lot to consider. We can't really know for sure what exactly was going on in everybody's head, but it's interesting, and I'm thankful that I was the oldest in my family.
Joe's thankful he's an only child.
That's right. Yeah. Well, moving on to our last issue to discuss for this chapter, we see in grief talking about Sheol. This is the first time Sheol is mentioned.
Yeah, for certain, we're going to see a whole lot more of this. But being the first place, one thing that stands out to me is here is Isaac, who knows God, who walks with God, who's received the promises of God. We've said before, we've seen an ark, but here, not at the end of his ark, but surely well into the development of his ark, his walk with God. He expects to go to Sheol. So, our modern day interpretation of this being hell, I think we ought to be careful that we read that in that we can scratch Sheol out of the Bible and write hell in there, and whatever we think of as hell is a perfect equating idea. Don't think we should do that. Bad interpretation as far as I'm concerned. But
yeah, the King James often translates Sheol as hell, but here in the King James it makes it the grave, and
the grave, the pit.
Yep, yeah. I have a really bad dad joke that crossed my mind. You guys want to hear it?
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
You're talking about Isaac's his ark, and I was just going to say it's a lot different than Noah's ark.
Oh, it is.
Oh man!
I told you it was bad. We should have let it. We should just let it go.
No, it's got to make it into the final cut of the video now. Can't edit it out.
Bible jokes are
Nothing's
funny
funnier
to
than
me.
Bible jokes, yeah.
They're funny to me. On a more serious note, Eric, you got anything to add on? He's groaning. Mm-hmm. I've disappointed you severely today, and I'm glad to have done it. You're welcome.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think it sounds like Jacob meant that he would mourn until he died. He would basically die of sorrow. I think he was using Sheol to refer to the grave. In support of this, the NIV translates Jacob's words as, "I will continue to mourn until I join my son in the grave." So that makes the most sense.
That's what the NIV says?
Yeah, it is. And it's
just
not
another reason to throw away the NIV.
Well, and I think, though, that remember that NIV is thought capturing. So it's not like it's true. It's not. I'm so appreciative.
Every
single word perfectly.
I so appreciate that they tell me what to think. That's great.
But I think my point was they translated Sheol as grave. Clearly, it means grave here, and we don't have time to get into this too much. I've looked at all the
clearly. It's the only thing it can mean is the grave.
Here in this verse. Yes, I think in this verse.
That's impressive. I disagree.
You just said you did you just say a minute ago that you thought it referred to the grave? And you said hell was a bad translation?
I think hell is a bad translation. Listen, the two options, there are not only two options, the grave or hell here
I
when
understand
we talk
that,
about
but-
the idea of Sheol.
Okay,
So,
but
yeah.
I must have misunderstood because it sounded as if you were saying that. I sound like you were saying the grave was what it was referring to.
I can't wait to rewatch the tape because if that's what I said, that's definitely not what I meant.
Greg, why don't you clarify? What do you mean?
Yeah, I believe, and again, we've had an episode on this, right? So I don't want to spend the time.
I don't think I was a part of that episode.
Were you not?
I don't think I think I missed that
It was
one.
when he was out gallivanting around the world or something. We'll link to it for anybody else who missed it. You can watch our video.
See my published works.
There are some articles that we have published. You could read those. You click on the links in the description box below. But Greg, go ahead, explain just briefly without the 2-hour-long conversation.
The greater sweep of Old Testament scripture, if you were to consider the greater body of how the biblical authors use the word Sheol, you will come away with more ideas than just the grave, and surely more than just hell. And so, so I'm not convinced. Like there seems to be this place, this abode of the dead, this place where dead go, that isn't just the material grave or eternal damnation, suffering, hellfire, and brimstone. And that's what I think that this is about.
Sure, and I would not disagree with you on that. I just thought you were emphasizing the grave as opposed to the other alternatives.
It is interesting. The New King James says that his words are, "For I shall go down into the grave to my son in mourning," which is pretty similar to the sentiment.
That's different.
It's similar to the sentiment that's being described by the NIV. And so depending on the translation that you're reading, there could be an awful lot more here, because this certainly doesn't sound like he thinks he's going to hell. It almost sounds like he thinks he's going to eventually. He will mourn in this world as long as he lives until he goes down to be reunited in the grave with his son. And we've seen, again, people being buried and wanting to be buried in certain places, being buried together. And so we are starting to at least get some hints that there is seemingly some idea, not necessarily that that's what we should take away or that it's but there is at least some idea in some of these folks that being together, being with your people, gathered to your people, buried in the land of your people, you're going to your people, that there is some idea of something after this life. But again, it's probably more complicated than we can get into in this episode. And it's one of the reasons for comparing translations to see, so the New King James and the NIV do seem to add this idea almost of a reuniting. And I don't think,
and I'm comfortable with that.
It's mourning until the reuniting.
Yeah. I've got my issues with the NIV, but I'll just stop.
Do you think the NIV is a devil Bible?
Do I think it's that? No, I definitely don't think it's devil. I've read books written by the translators of the NIV Bible, and I just don't appreciate their goal. So do I think no, I don't think it's a devil Bible at all. For what I'm trying to do with the Bible, for what I'm trying to understand, I don't need someone to tell me what to think somebody else meant. Just tell me what somebody else said, and I'll decide what to think about it.
I will never quote the NIV again.
Praise the Lord.
Greg's favorite translation is the Message, followed closely by the Passion Translation. You can watch our video about the King James only debate. It'll be linked up above. Comment below, is the NIV a devil Bible? We'd love to hear your thoughts.
I will laugh at you if you do, so go ahead.
And I personally won't hold Eric to whether or not he can ever quote the NIV again.
I don't think there's anything wrong with quoting the NIV, as long as we recognize what their translational goal is.
We're digressing. You guys got anything else on this, or shall we dive into chapter 38?
Let's go to 38.
Let's go to 38.
All right, let's read it. And maybe you're expecting more about Joseph.
No.
Not so fast.
And it came about at that time that Judah departed from his brothers and visited a certain Adulamite, whose name was Hira. Judah saw there a daughter of a certain Canaanite whose name was Shua, and he took her and went into her. So she conceived and bore a son, and he named him Then she conceived again and bore a son and named him Onan. She bore still another son and named him Shelah, and it was at Chesib that she bore him. Now Judah took a wife for Er his firstborn, and her name was Tamar. But Judah's firstborn, was evil in the sight of the Lord, so the Lord took his life. Then Judah said to Onan, "Go into your brother's wife, and perform your duty as a brother-in-law to her, and raise up offspring for your brother." Onan knew that the offspring would not be his, so when he went into his brother's wife, he wasted his seed on the ground in order not to give offspring to his brother. But what he did was displeasing in the sight of the Lord, so he took his life also. Then Judah said to his daughter-in-law Tamar, "Remain a widow in your father's house until my son Shelah grows up." For he thought, "I am afraid that he too may die like his brothers." So Tamar went and lived in her father's house. Now, after a considerable time, Shua's daughter, the wife of Judah, died, and when the time of mourning was ended, Judah went up to his sheep-shearers at Timnah, he and his friend Hira the Adulamite. It was told to Tamar, "Behold, your father-in-law is going up to Timnah to shear his sheep." So she removed her widow's garments and covered herself with a veil, and wrapped herself and sat in the gateway of Enaim, which is on the road to Timnah. For she saw that Shelah had grown up, and she had not been given to him as a wife. When Judah saw her, he thought she was a harlot, for she had covered her face. So he turned aside to her by the road and said, "Here now, let me come in to you." For he did not know that she was his daughter-in-law, and she said, "What will you give me that you may come in to me?" He said therefore, "I will send you a young goat from the flock." She said, "Moreover, will you give a pledge until you send it?" He said, "What pledge shall I give you?" And she said, "Your seal and your cord, and your staff that is in your hand." So he gave them to her and went in to her, and she conceived by him. Then she arose and departed, and removed her veil and put on her widow's garments. When Judah sent the young goat by his friend the Adulamite to receive the pledge from the woman's hand, he did not find her. He asked the men of her place, saying, "Where is the temple prostitute who was by the road at Enim?" But they said, "There has been no temple prostitute here." So he returned to Judah and said, "I did not find her. And furthermore, the men of the place said, 'There has been no temple prostitute here.'" Then Judah said, "Let her keep them, otherwise we will become a laughingstock. After all, I sent this young goat, but you did not find her." Now it was about 3 months later that Judah was informed, "Your daughter-in-law Tamar has played the harlot, and behold, she is also with child by harlotry." Then Judah said, "Bring her out and let her be burned." It was while she was being brought out that she sent to her father-in-law, saying, "I am with child by the man to whom these things belong." And she said, "Please examine and see whose signet ring and cords and staff are these." Judah recognized them and said, "She is more righteous than I, inasmuch as I did not give her to my son Shelah." And he did not have relations with her again. It came about at the time she was giving birth, that behold, there were twins in her womb. Moreover, it took place while she was giving birth. One put out a hand, and the midwife took and tied a scarlet thread on his hand, saying, "This one came out first." But it came about as he drew back his hand, that behold, his brother came out. Then she said, "What a breach you have made for yourself." So he was named Perez. Afterward his brother came out, who had the scarlet thread on his hand, and he was named Zerah.
Chapter 38, you guys, if we took chapter 38 out of the Bible and read 37 and then picked it up at 39, it would seem like one continuous narrative. But instead, we get this chapter dropped right in the middle, really, of a larger section that we'll begin talking about more in our next episode. But why this interruption? What's going on here in this chapter?
Listen, I'll ask the questions here.
Oh, you did write this question. I was just the
question.
mouthpiece
Yeah,
for it. I've been acting as Greg's voice by articulating the questions he wrote for us. So, yes, Greg, feel free to ask the questions here that I've already asked because you already wrote them down.
No, I don't want to ask it again. I don't want to have to answer.
No, you just wanted us to do it.
Yeah. No. So as far as I read it, chapter 37 opens, and we see what we've been noting is the opening with Toledot, right? These are the records of the generations of Jacob. So here's the story of Jacob's sons. And so we get the story of Joseph, we get the story of Judah, and then we go into the rest of Genesis is about Joseph. And so, Pastors Eric and Joe, why plop this? Like, you could have, like, I don't know, just taken this chapter during editing. You could have moved things around. Why here what feels like an interruption to Joseph's story?
Joe, you want to go first? Or you want me to?
Why don't you go first, Pastor Eric?
Okay. Well, chapter 38 begins by saying, "And it came about at that time that Judah departed from his brothers and visited a certain Adulamite, whose name was Hira." So the words, "and it came about at that time," tell us that the events in chapter 38 fit chronologically with the events in chapter 37. So it's not bizarre that these events are being mentioned here. And also, we learn about the wickedness of Joseph's brothers in chapter 37, and chapter 38 just gives us a closer look at the character of one particular brother, Judah. So in a way, chapter 38 makes more sense of the events in chapter 37. It sheds more light on the character of this particular person. And finally, for those who watch the show regularly, you should know by now that whenever the Bible stops the story to talk about the descendants of somebody, or it mentions a genealogy, you can be sure that those descendants are going to affect the story in some considerable way in the future. So just a rule to follow as you're reading scripture, and all of a sudden the Bible seems to go out of its way to mention someone's descendants. Okay, you can be sure that those descendants are going to play some role in the future, and they're going to have some part to play that forms the story and develops it later on. And we've seen that time and time again. We've seen, the Bible will stop as it's talking about, Esau and Jacob, and all of a sudden, Esau's wives are mentioned, and then his other descendants are mentioned. So, yeah, this to me, it really isn't incredibly surprising that this is mentioned. It seems out of place, but then when you look at like the context and the finer details, it's really not. To me, it's not shocking.
Yeah, I always want to pay attention to parenthetical statements because there is an interruption in the flow, and so this has stood out like a sore thumb to me.
Well, it sure does. It seems odd, and I think Eric's answer was very complete. If I was answering it without hearing what he said first, I would have probably emphasized simply the last part of that explanation. Certainly, as I hear his explanation, this does give a little bit more detail, I guess, about some of the brothers. It leaves me wondering about many of the others who we don't know that much about. I wonder why this is so focused on Judah and leaving out others, but doesn't mean I disagree with that. I just I would have focused more on the structural aspect, and we have stated it many times. It is just a good practice when reading the Old Testament. If the reason for it isn't immediately apparent, what we shouldn't do is just be like, oh, this doesn't make any sense, or we'll look at these ancient authors, they didn't know what to do with this material, so they just patched it together in some haphazard way. No, it's much more intentional than that, and they are planting a seed, or the technical term for it is pearling. We've used that before, that this pearling, they're giving us some information to keep us engaged. And when it sticks out to you like a sore thumb, which it should, especially because the ancient readers would have usually been hearing these things. They wouldn't like us sit down and read a devotional 15 minutes, bouncing around all over the place. They probably would have been hearing these things read to them in a longer form. It would kind of perk your attention and be like, oh, that's interesting. And then you're back to Joseph, and so then you're thinking about this, and then if it's going to come up later. something related to this will come up later. There will be some resolution to the tension that is created from this. And so, Greg, your attention to the text and saying, well, it sticks out like a sore thumb, I think that's the intention. And we'll see it again. There will be some impact for this later.
You hit on another thing that sticks out like a sore thumb. Why are we not told? We're told virtually nothing about the rest of his brothers. Like, what about the rest of these guys? Like, who were they? What, Yeah, so that also, the silence to me is odd.
Yeah, and here narrative, both in the Hebrew texts and even as we get into the New Testament, narrative isn't intending to give us every single detail. Of course, the skeptics and the people who are so hostile to the Scripture, they try and focus on the fact that maybe some of these details aren't exactly the same, or if you see stories told. But that is exactly how people talk. And it's not, if I talk about going on a road trip and I talk about a conversation I was having with my friend, and then later I say that I was on this road trip with my kids, and you go, well, wait, which was it? Did you have your friend with you, or were you with your kids? Well, it's possible that I had my friend sitting, in the passenger seat and my kids sitting in the back seat. And depending on who I'm telling that story to, for various reasons, that I might emphasize my conversation with them or emphasize my role with my kids, in which case the other characters, so to speak, in that story will fade into the background. And it's not contradictory. It's not lying. It's not whatever. It's just that's how people communicate. And do we really think that this is giving us a record of every single moment and every single detail and every single everything? So when, Eric, I liked your language, when the author or the narrator goes out of the way to bring our attention to something, we ought to pay attention to that. There's some reason for this. And if we're going to be generous, Greg, to use your terminology as well, if we're going to be generous with this, why don't we try and see the intention behind this? And so it doesn't become immediately apparent, but as we keep going, it'll probably become clearer. And maybe the fact that these other brothers are kind of fading into the background, we don't know as much about them. Maybe they're just not as prominent, and we don't need as much information about them for whatever reason. So we've seen Reuben, we've seen Simeon and Levi, we've seen Judah, we've seen Joseph. And these seem to be the main players. And if other people come to the forefront, let's pay attention to that and try and figure out why they're coming to the forefront. And if they fade into the background, I suppose maybe one of you guys can write a book about why they're in the background and do a bunch of speculation about it. I'm not going to do that. But
what's interesting is that, as you talk about level of detail provided in the text, the hostility people like you, Joe, have towards books with high levels of detail, like the master, the professor, Tolkien.
Oh boy.
People don't like those stories exactly because of the detail. And then we come to a, narrative that doesn't have as much detail. We go, wow, why do we get, you don't give me enough detail? Well, how much do you want, Mr. Tolkien hater?
Just hypocrisy.
It's just horrible is what it is. Intellectual suicide.
I just want to let the record state that you said Tolkien is the master, and that whatever. Like I like the Bible, and I don't
a particular
want Tolkien.
kind of master.
Goodness gracious! All right, let's move on. You'd make everything theological.
You're trying to turn it on me. I mean, well, turnabout's fair play.
That's true. Turnabout is fair play. Yes, let's move on. Let's move on.
What do we make about this description of Judah? So, I mean, we kind of talked about why it's here. Now let's actually talk about what it's saying about him. It's almost neutral in the way that it presents this, but it is a fairly bizarre story. I mean, we read about Simeon and Levi earlier, and what they did, and how we read that. How do you guys read this story about Judah and Tamar?
For me, you say it's almost neutral, and I suppose the tone of the text is very neutral. But you look at this and you go, "My goodness, man! Like really? Like, first of all, you take and you're marrying a Canaan or having children with a Canaanite woman. That's problematic, yeah. And then you go and you deal kind of falsely with your daughter-in-law. That's problematic. And then your wife dies, and here you are shacking up with who you think is a cult prostitute, temple prostitute. Like, this is problematic. So if nothing else, this highlights the unworthiness or the character flaws or the insufficiencies of Judah, as I read the text.
Yeah. The expression, like father, like son, kind of comes to mind a little bit. There's not that I'm certainly not saying that his father did the same thing, but it's just like, we see like there's these men are just they're sinful men in a lot of ways, and it's not masked in the text. And I'm actually glad the language is casual rather than graphic. I think that's by design. But I don't think it's meant to be taken in a neutral way. Just the opposite's true. In verse 26, after Judah realized what he did, he said, "She, that is Tamar, is more righteous than I." This is a confession of sin. And the verse goes on to say, "And he did not have relations with her again. So he confessed his sin, he repented of his sin." And so it's as I read this, I it just seems to me like, yeah, the language itself, the way that the story is told, it does kind of sound neutral, but yet if you look at like the details, like he clearly is confessing his sins, and so there's a moral, definitely a moral, nature to this particular part of the story.
Yeah, the tone of the text is, it doesn't say, then this wicked sinner Judah,
Right,
it came about that he was despised in the sight of the Lord. It doesn't, you don't get all those narrative markers, but
True.
But yes, as a dispassionate presentation of the facts, not a good thing.
Yeah. And so I think your point is a really good one about him confessing his sin and stating that Tamar was more righteous than he. So we've seen up until this point, the text has gone out of its way to show us, the Leah's first sons in order before she stopped bearing, and the first four sons that Jacob had were Reuben, Simeon, and Levi, and now Judah. Those are the first four. And so if we were sticking to the normal birth order, we've seen the text now go out of its way. We saw Reuben going up to his father's couch, Simeon and Levi, as we talked about, going and killing a whole group of people, and now Judah doing this. Do you guys have any thoughts or why is the text going out of its way to kind of systematically take us down the lineage and talk about the wicked deeds that these brothers have done in order like this?
I suppose, an argument, I'm willing to get behind this argument, is to present the primacy of Joseph as the firstborn son of the loved wife because of what the sons of the wife, the unwanted wife, because of their sins, because of their fallenness. That's why Joseph can be preeminent, because perhaps.
That's an interesting thought, and that could very well be. There's definitely something to be said about the fact that Joseph was the firstborn of Rachel, and I think that's important too, because we see that Leah had all these sons, and Rachel only had two, and she died from having the last one, the second one. So yeah, I think there's something to be said about the fact that Joseph did come from Rachel. She was, of course, as far as children are concerned, she was less than Leah. She had less children, and yet there's something very special about her son Joseph, and you'll see that as the story plays out. But as far as the sins of the brothers, and I don't want to read too much into this, and I kind of hesitated to bring this up just because I don't want to be some kind of psychologist here. But there are some clues that Jacob was probably not the best father of all time. For example, Genesis 37:3-4 says that Jacob loved Joseph more than all his other sons, and this caused the other sons to hate Joseph. So Jacob's partiality seems like it negatively affected his family. If a son doesn't experience love from his father, he's more likely to go astray. So this might have contributed to the wickedness of Jacob's sons. I can't really, again, I'm not trying to read things into the text that aren't there, but I don't know that we can make a case that Jacob was got the Father of the Year award.
I'm looking at Greg's face, and I think that that's maybe Greg's opinion, that that's the most commendable aspect of it. Jacob's he's if a father doesn't love one child more than mother, what's he really even doing?
What's going on here? No, my family is quite convinced that I have favorites, and I'll state here on the record that's not true. Off record, absolutely, there are kids that I like.
Just between us.
Just between the record that counts.
So, man, yeah. Not naming it. So as I read this, does it make Jacob a bad father that he has a son that he loves more? Now, again, how was that expressed? How did that, was it, again, there's ditches on all sides of that road, right? But it's also just how it is, right? I have there's lots of people that I like better than others. So what does it mean that he loved Joseph more? In a dysfunctional way? Okay, let's not be dysfunctional. But in some ways, like, how is it avoidable? I won't ask either of you.
Yeah.
But Joe, we all know, your family knows who your favorite is.
Sticking to the text that we have before us, we saw that Esau was more loved than Jacob, and now Jacob is, he has preferential. He loved one wife more than another, and he loved the children that came from that beloved wife more. And while this might be a very human characteristic, you guys have mentioned, like, this preeminence that comes out certainly in the text. I mean, the amount of text that we get about Joseph is it's not even close. We just get so much about him. He comes to the forefront. There is so much importance about what is going to be happening in his life and how God is going to order things in order to bring about even the dream that he gave him. But for those who are biblically aware, and I know you guys, we're doing this task of trying to stick closely at hand. The household or the tribe that becomes more important of all these ones isn't Joseph, it's Judah.
Mm-hmm.
And so, interestingly, here with this story of Judah and Tamar, we do see the text going out of its way to give us a whole chapter. Reuben got a little statement, and then he's not the hero, but he was trying to at least preserve Joseph's life. Simeon and Levi, they got a whole chapter, and now Judah's got a whole chapter. And yet, of all these families, let's just keep our eye out for kind of the future that is being told for the descendants that will come from these. Just like we talked about the descendants that will come from Esau taking wives from the Canaanites. That's setting us up for something down the future. This also, we're getting an idea of kind of what's going to come down the road. And interestingly, we see God's choice, just like it was for Jacob over Esau, God's choice of Joseph for this particular task isn't necessarily exclusive. There might be some choice of Judah or others for various things down the road. And so there's a lot of moving parts in this stuff. And the text is, Genesis is the book of beginnings. It's kind of generating the origins of these things. And, the origin stories matter.
Mm-hmm.
So here we are looking at the origin story. So I think I've got one more question for us, basically kind of keeping in line with this. But is there anything that we can say about the significance of Judah's children with Tamar? I mean, this was confessed as a sinful thing. She got pregnant from this sinful relationship. Judah stated that she was more righteous than he, but anything that we can say about the offspring of this relationship without earning ourselves a demerit?
Eric?
Well, like I said earlier, whenever the Bible stops the story to talk about someone's descendants, you can be sure that those descendants are going to affect the story in some considerable way later on. How will Perez and Zerah affect the story later on? We don't know yet. We'll have to wait and see. So stay tuned and until we get through the entire Bible, and then everything will become very clear to you.
Don't hold your breath.
You handled that with great aplomb. Yeah, well done. Greg?
No, I think without earning demerits, I think it's very hard. But yeah, again, I think we should more often read the Bible looking for that purling to answer questions like why here, why now, why this detail. I think that's good. And so when we hear about the eventual offspring that comes from this line, circling back, I think we'll understand why it's important.
Fair enough. Well, brothers, I appreciate your insights and your thoughts and your conversation. That is our show for today. If you're still watching the video and you liked the video, go ahead and click the thumbs up button and like the video. If you enjoy conversations of this sort, we got a lot more to go. And so make sure that you're subscribed and you've hit that notification bell so you won't miss any of our future conversations. We'd also love to hear your thoughts. You heard ours if you stuck with us this far. So comment below. Let us know what you think about these chapters, questions that you would ask, or if you would answer any of these things differently. We'd love to hear that. Let us know if you have a favorite child. We'd love to have you put that on the record down in the comments below as well. And until we see you all again next time, get equipped, obey your king, and glorify your God.
I will never quote the NIV again.